Coming up on today's Hot Zone, a look back at the Maidan Square Massacre in Ukraine and an update on Afghanistan and what the future there might hold. All right, here we go.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, I'm glad you're over here supporting the Hot Zone. Over the past several weeks, I've been to Syria and Venezuela, and I've had a chance to help a whole lot of people because of the generosity of people like you. My idea for this podcast has been simple. Just go to the worst places in the world and help the people there in three ways. First and foremost, pray for them. Then tell their stories to the world, and finally look for ways to help them materially, whether by giving food or medical care, or just a little bit of money to help them get by. And people are loving this concept. I've heard from so many of you who say it's really frustrating to watch the news and hear about all the heartache going on around the world and then feel so powerless to do anything about it. I've also heard that while giving to a big charity might do some good, it's not as satisfying as seeing exactly what's done with your money. I want this to be a more engaging and dynamic news platform. You get the unvarnished truth about the people and places in the news. Go watch yesterday's podcast if you haven't already, where I aired the uncut interview with Mohammed, my friend who's an Iraqi soldier and war hero who was shot 6 times saving a little girl and her father from ISIS snipers. And then you get to reach right into those same people's lives and become a part of the story. So what's not to like? All right. Let's take a look at today's news. While I've been reporting so much on Syria and Venezuela, which has had a lot of stuff going on, we kind of missed an interesting anniversary, that of the Maidan Square Massacre in Ukraine, which happened 5 years ago. Now, let me set the stage for you if you don't remember for what happened. Back in 2014, the majority of Ukrainians really wanted their country to identify more with Europe than with Russia. And it's a well-known fact that Vladimir Putin would like nothing more than to rebuild the old USSR's kind of buffer zone of countries like the Balkans and then control them in sort of a coalition of the unwilling. Ukrainians didn't like that idea very much, but their president at the time, Viktor Yanukovych, was more of a puppet of the Russians. So on February 20th, 2014, a large protest began in the central square in Kiev. Yanukovych sent in the police and ordered snipers to fire on the crowd, which resulted in about 100 people killed. Things went south from there, and this led to weeks of tense and sometimes violent protests. Yanukovych fled to Russia, and the country got new leadership. It was called the Maidan Square Revolution.
The causes of this current conflict are pretty complex, but let me try and simplify it for you. Ukraine is a very important political prize between Europe and Russia. Russia has spent a lot of money trying to influence the political process here over the last several years. And the Ukrainians have, I think, kind of a healthy suspicion of that because many of their parents and grandparents suffered through what was called the Holodomor. It's a systematic starvation of 7 to 10 million Ukrainians back in the 1930s, orchestrated by Russia. So if they have a healthy suspicion, that's probably understandable. But what's amazing about what we see here is that this was orchestrated by regular people, students and civilians, who got tired of the corruption in their government and stood up to fully armed troops with nothing but bottles and stones. That makes Russia pretty nervous now that their sock puppet of a president is gone, because they have a lot of assets here in Ukraine. You know, if you'd told me 20 years ago that I would be sitting inside a Russian nuclear missile launch site, I would have said you were crazy. Even today, it feels a little surreal to be sitting here surrounded by all this former Soviet military equipment at this base in central Ukraine. I think America needs to be careful about how we approach this crisis between Russia and Ukraine today, because while we might not be facing down too many of these SS-18 ICBMs anytime soon, Russia does have some pretty powerful weapons in its arsenal that it could use against the United States if we start slapping sanctions on it indiscriminately. What I mean is that Russia is the 7th largest U.S. creditor. That means they've got almost $200 billion of treasuries that, if it were to decide to sell those tomorrow, could really cause havoc in the U.S. bond markets. But even more important than that, Russia is the world's largest producer of gas and oil, and all of that petroleum gets traded in U.S. dollars, and it has for many years. But if Russia decided tomorrow to trade in euros or Chinese currency or something else, that could really lead to the end of the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency. And that would be a very, very bad thing.
But a couple months later, Russia moved troops into eastern Ukraine and Crimea, which sparked a war that's still going on to this day. And people are dying every day in this conflict. And around the area of Donbass, there's become what some refer to as a human rights black hole. Now, I'd hoped to travel to Ukraine with a pastor friend of mine who has very good connections there in mid-March, but I've had trouble getting the $2,000 budget approved, which is understandable because budgets are always tight and this kind of trip is never cheap. But there are a lot of hurting people over there, and I'd love to get there and tell their story. Some of the patrons of this podcast seem to think we could raise enough from our supporters to do the trick. So if you think I should go, feel free to donate via PayPal or Patreon.com. And if I can raise the funds, we'll go bring you the story and we'll help as many people as we can. Now, as I've been researching this story, I found a report that says Christians in Ukraine are targets of the Russian government. There was a list of the leaked churches across that country, which would be burned if Russia invades further. So I'd like to do more investigation into that. Anyway, so let's move on. Let's talk about Afghanistan now. I'm really interested in the news coming out of there because my son Mason just arrived in northern Afghanistan for his first combat tour as a crew chief in a medevac unit. Now, I've embedded with units like his before, and while many of the 6,000 or so troops that we have in country right now are relegated to the advise and assist role, training Afghan troops and providing intel support, things like that, which means they rarely get to leave the base or get out where the fighting is, Mason's unit will be different. The medevac support that they're providing to the Afghan army means they're going to be doing lots of point of injury pickups of wounded Afghan troops. And that means hopefully Mason will get to see some of the country. And of course, we pray for his safety, but it'd be a shame to spend 9 months in the war zone and not actually see any action. So I'm hoping that he'll get a chance to go out and see some of that. On my first trip to Afghanistan, I embedded with the medevac unit and went along on one very tragic mission that really was kind of a defining moment in my career. Check this out.
Task Force Shadow is an aviation unit based at Bagram Airfield. Its presence is vital, given the increase in enemy activity over the last year. Abram DeMarco is acting commander.
These are some of the greatest people that I've ever worked with. They work 15 to 20 hours a day sometimes. You can always count on them. These are some of the best maintained aircraft that I've ever worked with.
The aviation company of the 101st Airborne here at Bagram Airfield is one of the busiest units in the country. They're constantly being called on every day to ferry troops and equipment all over the eastern part of Afghanistan. But there's one other part of their mission that's even more important, and it goes by the call sign, Dust Off.
Several times a day, sirens signal the need for emergency medical evacuation. On call at all times, this small team of highly trained pilots and medical personnel is ready to respond. Dwayne Taylor is a medevac helicopter co-pilot.
Basically, we're flying emergency room. We have everything that a patient needs in the back to stay alive, even all the way down to shocking that person to restart their heart.
It isn't long before the call comes in. A roadside bomb has hit a convoy south of Kabul. There are 6 urgent casualties. The crews rush to their aircraft, and moments later, we're airborne. The tension rises when we receive word that troops on the ground are receiving rocket and machine gun fire. It's expected to be a hot landing zone.
It's constantly running through my mind. Every single time we go to a point of injury that we could possibly be shot at or be attacked at while we're sitting there on the ground.
We touch down hard in a cloud of dust. Even before it clears, the wounded start to hobble aboard. That's when we get the terrible news. 2 soldiers of the 101st Airborne have died of their wounds. Over the radio, they're referred to as heroes. Emotions are high, and I drop my camera to help one of the wounded buckle in. Then the soldiers returned with one more litter, one of those killed in action. That hero's name is Donnie Carwile, a first lieutenant who left his job as a policeman in Oxford, Mississippi, to lead a platoon here in Afghanistan. Back at home, his wife Jennifer and 2 young daughters would soon get the painful news that their lives have changed forever. But there wasn't time to grieve. On the way back to base, the flight surgeon and medics worked with grim efficiency to stabilize the wounded. Upon landing at the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses whisked the soldiers off to surgery. At the end of the day, I sat down with the platoon commander, Lieutenant Graham Inman, and talked about the stress that comes with doing this kind of work every day.
It's cumulative, and it's not like it just wears off, and everyone has, in my personal opinion, has their own threshold of what they can handle. This isn't a job that you can do and not be affected by.
One of the ways these pilots deal with that is through volunteer work with the children at the hospital next door. There, military doctors treat many local Afghans, and these kids bring joy to men who have seen too much of death.
So every time I look at those kids, I see my kids.
Without a doubt, the hardest thing is being away from the wife and kids. But all you have to do is see the Afghans and how they're struggling and how they're trying to better themselves and their families, and you realize that this is something that needs to be done.
I get a great sense of satisfaction out of what I do. I wouldn't say that I thoroughly enjoy it. There's some very unpleasant things about my job, but every day when I go to bed at the end of the night, I know I've saved lives.
And as for me, I can say that after this mission, Veterans Day has taken on a whole new meaning. Chuck Holton, CBN News, Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan.
Now, there's still plenty of action going on. The Taliban is simultaneously in talks with the government and stepping up attacks around the country. 2018 was the deadliest year on record in terms of civilian casualties in that country. And while ISIS is being vanquished in Syria, they're now recruiting in Afghanistan. They're known as ISIS-K. And U.S. officials last week called them the biggest threat to America in that region. So even if a peace deal is reached, that's no foredrawn conclusion, by the way, there'll likely be continued fighting in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future. Now, I realize it's easy to get frustrated about what's going on in that country. We spent a profane amount of America's blood and treasure there, and sometimes it looks like we don't really have a lot to show for it. But as the conflict has evolved over almost 2 decades now, it's important to see Afghanistan for what it is. In some sense, it's a proxy battleground where we're countering Iran and even Pakistan's influence in that region. Now, I don't believe all the nation building we've done over there has really been necessary or even helpful. We're talking $1 billion a week that we've spent on that ground. We're not going to make Afghanistan a Jeffersonian democracy. It's just not going to happen. And we shouldn't want to necessarily. But much of the money we've spent over the past 10 years has been an attempt to mitigate the risk our troops face by throwing money at problems which really might be better addressed by good old-fashioned boots on the ground. You know, years ago, Ann Coulter made a statement regarding Afghanistan. She said, our strategy shouldn't be to go over there and, our strategy should be to go over there, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity. And she got a lot of flack for that statement at the time. But with the benefit of hindsight, there's really a lot of wisdom in that. See, sometimes violence is the answer, or perhaps a shortcut to the answer at least. Look, in World War II, firebombing Dresden was a horrific thing, but it probably got us to the end of World War II sooner, which meant less aggregate misery and death in the long run, especially for America. The lesson from Afghanistan is the same that my dad taught me when I was a little guy. Do everything you can to avoid a fight, but if you have to fight, do everything in your power to win it as quickly as possible. Go all out. And America needs leaders who understand that lesson, especially in Afghanistan. So pray for leaders like that. And while you're at it, pray for the troops who are still, after more than 17 years, carrying out American foreign policy in that dusty, far-off land at the foothills of the Hindu Kush. May God send His Spirit to Afghanistan and ease the suffering of its people and bring our troops home for good sooner rather than later. Well, that's it for the Hot Zone today. If you'd like to join us, go to patreon.com/hotzone and subscribe. And please like and share us on your social media. We'll hope to see you back here tomorrow, right here on the Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.